You know, I'm going to give you a history lesson.
We got some dumbass motherfuckers floating around this country.
Stop laughing! And when I do, start.
Also, y'all did some nasty-ass jokes on my ass, too.
Funny jokes and unfunny jokes come out of the same birth.
You f***ing guys are unbelievable.
Why are you laughing?
Evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Why Are You Laughing, a history of comedy podcast. And today, I am pleased to introduce to you the great Martin Mull, the late great Martin Mull, I should say. Sadly, we lost Martin Mull this summer at age 80. And usually when a comedy legend like that dies, if we haven't done an episode about him, Martin Mull was definitely on my list to cover because I loved Martin Mull. Where as like a character actor, he was just one of those guys. Gilbert, I guess, was kind of like this, but definitely like Fred Willard, Eugene Levy, Chris Elliott. I think a lot of like the Christopher Guest guys I think of kind of in this ilk where they would do a lot of like kids stuff. So when I was a kid, I know Martin Mull from like Sabrina the Teenage Witch. But then like at every stage of life, he was in things that I enjoyed. Like after that, I would see him in reruns of Roseanne and then Arrested Development. And then eventually I would get into his much older stuff like Fernwood Tonight, we've talked about before, particularly in the Fred Willard episode. Like might be to me the most underrated piece of television ever, because I think there's so much like it, and that was so ahead of its time. And Martin Mull, obviously, a massive part of that. So we will get into everything that Martin Mull did throughout his career, and including some things I wasn't totally aware of. So I'm excited to talk about that today. Hope you guys appreciate the great Martin Mull, and this sends you down a rabbit hole of some of his work, particularly, like I said, Fernwood Tonight, which I always recommend to people. But before that, we can talk about Martin. Martin's dead, all right? Support the living and go to blindmike.net, all right? Make hay while the sun's shining. Because if you want these episodes early, usually a week early, in the case of taking a summer off, sometimes you get them a couple months early if we feel like it. So if you want early access to episodes as well as bonus content, then make sure you subscribe on Patreon or YouTube, become a member on either platform. Like I said, for those early shows and bonus shows. You can also check out the Blind Mike Project and everything we do there. On Patreon, we watch Quincy. It's more fun than it sounds when I say it like that.
It really is.
It's a lot more fun than I've advertised it, I swear. But yeah, get all that stuff, or just support us wherever you get the show. We're available on all platforms, wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, and the like. But particularly if you watch on YouTube, make sure to smash that like button, comment, subscribe, tap the notification bell. All that helps more comedy fans find the show. If you like this subject, you like other things on YouTube, then it'll help more like-minded people say, I like Martin Mull. I'd like to learn more about him. So support the show. We appreciate that. You also support Craig. Any of you Craigophiles out there, go to verygoodshow.org and support the Craigster.
I'm not even sure if that link's working right now, but...
Well, whatever. Find him.
Find me.
Like check Craig has done to so many others on the internet. You find him this time.
That's nice.
All right. No, this is not the time or place for any of that crude talk. Let's get into Martin Mull here, shall we?
We shall.
Very artsy guy. Maybe more than you'd expect, I guess. But he talks about in a lot of his interviews. He would talk about painting and basically say he would say that like all of his other art forms, whether it's music, comedy, acting, that was all essentially so he could afford to paint as much as he wanted to. So he went to the Rhode Island School of Design, which is a very reputable fine arts school. He got his master's. So comes off as, if you just read Martin Mull on paper, he's kind of a snob, like as you would think of him as
gross, an art guy.
Yeah, exactly. You would think of him as like highbrow comedy, but I think he appeals to all types, kind of like The Simpsons in a way, where, The Simpsons would go for sometimes the lowest common denominator and the highest, where they would have like really highbrow intellectual stuff and then just, dumb Homer's an idiot jokes, I think Martin Mull kind of fits that category in a way. I didn't realize how influential he was in stand-up our favorite here, Norm Macdonald, said that the two guys he liked as like a young teenager, the two guys in stand-up that he really looked up to, Steve Martin and Martin Mull, who did tour together, which we'll talk about. But I didn't realize like the amount of Grammy nominations Martin Mull had for his albums. It was a lot of like musical comedy, but he would do a lot of like riffing and commentary in between the songs. And he was very influential in stand-up. So let's get into that. Well, first he started in music, which is, I believe, where we're starting.
And that was what kept me in basically beer, cigarettes, in my $35 a month apartment.
Right.
It had to. I mean, there was nothing else coming in. So when the master's degree finally was done, and there was no doctorate, and I had to actually have gainful employment if I was going to eat, the only thing I really knew how to do other than paint and draw, which I was still and am still in the process of learning, was to go out and play music. And at that time, I had been writing a few songs, and they were not typical songs. This was also, again, during the folk music thing, which I just found horrible, and the protest song thing, which I had one protest song once I did called Stop the War or I Won't Stop Singing, which was kind of so I just would write these kind of odd little songs. There were songs about a guy who had married a midget, and there was a song about a woman who was missing her ring finger and would never do anything sexual until she had a ring on her finger and had no finger to have one on. It said it was a rumba. And I used to do these little songs, and people liked them, so I started doing those live. And the thing is, I was such, and am still, a dreadful singer that I would go into
also in your dossier.
Yeah, would go into these long-winded explanations before the song and apologies after that turned into an act over the years.
Right.
And all of a sudden I found myself making a living.
So it's sort of.
It sounds like if you talk about people that Martin Mull influenced, this is kind of the reach that I think his brand of humor had. Is like, that sounds to me like a mix of Adam Sandler and Bo Burnham, who are very different performers. But like that's what I'm talking about with kind of an appeal to everyone, which is weird to say about a guy who, again, was essentially a character actor. Like, Martin Mull was not necessarily a household name by any means, yet his humor appealed to everyone, and he had a great deal of success. That's what I find very interesting about a lot of those guys. Fred Willard's the same way, where it's like, for whatever reason, they never had a massive sitcom or anything like that. Nothing was ever mainstream, like off the chart success, at least not that they were the star in or the focal point of. Yet they touched all these different things and were hilarious in all of them. And to me, that's pretty amazing. So, he started off with like a decent music career. He opened for the level that he was, is basically he's a guy that could say he opened once for a bunch of names like Frank Zappa. They asked him, he did an episode of Norm Macdonald Live, which I highly recommend you check out. Not on YouTube though; it's on like Vimeo or something. But
Frank Zappa is no joke.
No, he opened for Zappa. There was another band that I was impressed. I think he might have, maybe the Doors. I forget. There was another name on there where I was like, oh, holy shit, good for him.
Yeah. Captain Beefheart.
I'm not sure, but
That's in the Zappa.
But they asked him, like, if you look at his like Wikipedia, they list a bunch of people that he opened for, and one of them is Bruce Springsteen, and that catches your eye. You're like, oh, holy shit. And Adam Egan asked him about that, and he goes, you know what's interesting about that? He goes, I have no memory of it. And really? They go, it says it's 1974, and he goes, oh well, I definitely don't have any memory of it. I think he might have been doing dipping into the psychedelics at that time, and definitely drinking is what he said. But also the way he described it, he goes, you know what it might have been is a festival where Bruce Springsteen was small time at that point.
I know who it was you were thinking of.
Who's that?
Billy Joel.
That's not who I was thinking of, but that is another one where you're like, holy shit.
Randy Newman.
Randy Newman is another big one. Yeah, no, there's a bunch of names that he like brushed elbows with. But Springsteen, when that came up, he's like, yeah, I have no memory of it, which is pretty interesting. So it's possible they were just at a festival. Like imagine we were at if something like this existed, a podcasting festival with Joe Rogan 20 years ago, And we were just like, no, I don't know the guy. Never heard of him. But yeah, so like he was, you know, he had some success in music, but as you hear him talk about there, he liked mocking things. Like even his serious songs, he would try and kind of come across a funny angle to him. And what's interesting about stand-up as an art form is, as we talk about all the time, it's so new in the sense that when we talk about the early guys, and by early I mean 50s, 60s, 70s, these guys didn't want to get into stand-up. Almost none of them said, oh, my dream is to be a stand-up, because none of their idols were stand-ups. Their idols were, you know, on television or you know, maybe Broadway performers or musical artists, whatever. This is who their influences were. So they didn't think, oh, what I want to be is a stand-up. Now you have all these guys who were influenced by, I mean, decades of people, Eddie Murphy and Seinfeld and Louis C.K. and Burr and generations of great comedians. These guys didn't have that. They were like, no, I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to be a musician, basically. And that's kind of how Martin Mull got into stand-up. So, but his, again, when you talk, I say ahead of his time, his stage show seemed very ahead of its time. Like he would have, he would bring his own furniture to put out on stage, like an easy chair, and he had a dresser, and he made it feel like you were hanging with Martin Mull. Now, when he got big enough, the clubs would provide this stuff. He would put it on his rider or whatever. But like in the early days, he would schlep this stuff to gigs, and you'd see, like, if you were around at a certain time, you would have seen Martin Mull lugging his easy chair into the comedy club.
That must have been a pain in the ass.
I can't imagine it, especially back then. But
yeah, I better make it. This can't last.
Right.
Next, we have him talking about Steve Martin.
Yeah, so I mentioned how Norm looked up to these guys, Steve Martin, Martin Mull. They actually went on, they did some shows together and became good friends, which you'll hear about here.
The only comedy tours I did, Steve Martin and I did a bunch of shows together, and we've become and are still very good friends because of that. That was a lot of fun.
You guys did shows together. How did you find each other through?
Just it was an accident of booking, you know, that I would be the opening act and Steve would close. I think the first place we played was down in the Great Southeast Music Hall in Atlanta, Georgia, and I recall. I'll never forget, his reputation preceded him with me. You know, I had seen him on the Smothers Brothers show and things like that, and I was very impressed with the man. So that when I was coming down the corridor backstage in our dressing room area, I'll call it dressing rooms. They knew I loved tar paper. And I'm walking down there, and I'm walking by this guy sitting there tuning his banjo, and it's Steve. And I literally could not think of anything to say as I walked by him. I didn't even say hello to him. I got about 4 steps past, and he said, "Oh, pretty good. How are you?" And at which point I started laughing, and we just became fast friends ever since.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Well, what it is, too, is perfect Steve. Like, it's great when you hear Steve Martin's doing Steve Martin-y things off stage.
Yeah, that's just who he is.
It just sounds exactly like Steve Martin. But again, like, I didn't know for sure that Martin Mull started in stand-up. That's the level of knowledge about how I had about his stand-up career. And he was tremendously influential. Like, he was touring with Steve Martin. He was nominated for Grammys. And as he put it, he mentioned that he and Steve Martin were both nominated for a Grammy one year. And then the next year, Steve Martin got nominated again, and Martin Mull was nominated for Best Album Design. And he said, the only place I had to go from there was Best Shrink Wrap. So I quit, which is very funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of the league he played in. And again, we talked about this a lot with Steve Martin, but in a way it's almost less impressive because of how famous Steve Martin got. Yeah. When you talk about ahead of his time, like the stuff that Martin Mull was doing, it was not for arenas. And so to stick with that and then to get into TV shows like Fernwood Tonight or like The History of White People in America and like these kind of obscure things, to keep chipping away at all of those, that to me is very impressive.
Now we have his stage act here.
Yeah, so this is a little taste of what we're talking about. I didn't pick any of the music because I figured, YouTube is weird with that. We might get taken down or something.
Yeah.
But this is a little of the riffing I was talking about between songs.
It's happened before. This is a lovely place, and let's put it out of our heads. It's not like some of the places we've played, which have been pretty grim. Oh, you wouldn't believe it. There's one place where we had to play, and it was unbelievable. It was located next to one of those like punk bars, with the big rainbow colors out front, all the people. And you come inside and everybody is just jammed in so that if you even had to go to the bathroom, you couldn't get up and get out of the place. And the lights are still sort of on the audience. You know what I mean? There's people with cameras running around. Like they don't even care about you. It's like a whole other project they're working on.
He's describing the room he's in.
Expensive.
What was that?
He's describing the room he's in right now.
Yes.
Half the audience is complimentary, so you don't make a dime. It's unbelievable. The kind of dump I'm talking about. Absolutely. We were able to write a song about this. Excuse me? I don't blame you for speaking out. A lot of times during a Rams game, I'll go out and talk to Pat Hayden. Before you throw that pass, excuse me, I know Jim Marshall's coming at you, but I just want to ask you something. Nice to see you here. Guess they dropped those child molesting charges, huh? And they're so hard to make stick and such. But you were lucky. This is 3 times now. Oh dear, but the kids love it.
See, those jokes aren't that funny.
It is very funny to get into a child molesting bit just because someone yells out. But again, like you talk about how fucking quick he was, where he just go, and maybe that's a canned line that he used often, but it seemed so relaxed and so quick to be like, yeah, no, sometimes during a Rams game, I go down and talk to Pat Hayden. I thought that was very funny.
It is good.
But like, this is something we talk about from time to time, where his stand-up, while like critically successful, I don't think it made him a millionaire or anything. Now he would have found completely his audience. He certainly wouldn't be lugging his own furniture into comedy clubs,
Right.
And that's the power of the internet, basically. But back then, like it was just harder for a guy like Martin Mull, and he had his comedy following, but it was harder for a guy to break out like that without just being on a TV show or in movies. Like you didn't need that back then. Whereas now you can just make a very successful career purely on stage for a stand-up.
Right. And I think he was a big football fan, judging by this next clip called Field Goals.
I just threw this in because I think it's he's the perfect Letterman guest, by the way. This is on Letterman that he's talking about this. Because he totally got the joke. He has such a contempt for Hollywood, which we'll talk about a little. But he was very Letterman-esque, and you could tell Letterman loved him. And this is just a weird thing that he did. I don't know what age this went to, but this is him talking about kicking field goals.
Are you still doing your field goal kicking?
Still go out and kick 2-3 times a week at least. This is true. I can't play tennis. It's wimpy. Right. I can't jog. Why run? I have 2 cars. Go out and run. It makes so little sense.
I remember when you tried running. When you lived at the beach, you would run a little bit. But what was the problem?
The ice would fly out of your drink. Exactly. The cigarettes are going out. It's absurd. But I have a car. Why run? So I go out and kick. I hit 2 from 47 yards.
47. Now, you always like to try and kick your
my age.
Right, yeah.
As long as I can continue to hit from the same distance of my age, then I will stay in relatively good shape. I'm 47. I've hit from 47.
This is
such a weird thing to do. And he would talk about how he would like go. The more famous he got, he would go kick at some high school and just pray like no one was around that would recognize him or anything. He would do it in shame, basically, which is very funny.
Did he have someone holding for him?
No, he said he would do it on a tee. But that was part of it. He says he doesn't want anyone to watch him or anything. But I don't know how long that lasted. The last I heard him talk about it, he was on Carson in like 91, I think. So he made it into at least his late 40s, which is pretty good. The guy's kicking 48-yard field goals.
He's sitting from 72.
Yeah, I'm not sure how long into his life that it went. But yeah, it is you hear the other reason I like that clip is that you hear in his delivery, like, it's just a certain genre. He was very Letterman-y. Like, he could have been Letterman. There's a certain guy that, like, totally gets that weird thing that guys like Letterman and Christopher Guest and others were doing in the 80s and into the 90s and stuff. And Martin Mull was definitely one of those guys that just got it. Another opportunity that I think makes sense, like you could definitely see him on this show. Norm asked him, like, he's like, you're never on Saturday Night Live in any capacity, never hosted, never cast or anything. And they said when they started, because if you remember, early SNL was much different. They hadn't fully figured out what the show was yet.
Right.
So I guess Lorne Michaels saw him playing his music and said, you know what you might be good for is being like a band leader, essentially. So like we could have you in the band. And I guess he auditioned and it didn't go well. And he never spoke to Lorne Michaels again. Like never saw, he's like, I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but it was just there was never any thought of him being on SNL after that. So very briefly brushed elbows with Saturday Night Live, which if you think back to that early cast, like he would have been perfect there.
Definitely.
But yeah, never worked out, unfortunately.
But we have him here on the Tonight Show.
Okay, perfect. What's he talking about?
I have to confess, even now that the job is so well taken by Jay and not up for grabs, there were times when I guest hosted here, I'll never forget that I actually, moments behind that desk where I actually had to get just that close to not being sincere. I know.
Hard to believe.
I know.
Hard to believe.
Well, you get some guest over here that, well, we know that the human being is we're 70% water. Okay, this person lived up to that, and the other 30% was collagen. and you'd sit there and you look at the notes, and you'd have to say something like, "I understand you brought along some of your poetry to read. Gee, that sounds like fun."
There are moments that creep up over the years like that, and you just kind of go with the flow.
Yeah. Do you ever find yourself just hating the question you have to ask someone?
What?
Carson was also great about that, and the reason I think Carson loved Letterman is because of his contempt for Hollywood and celebrity and all that stuff, which is weird because there was no one more ingratiated in Hollywood than Carson was Hollywood.
Right.
So it's this weird dynamic where he had such contempt for it, yet represented it entirely, which is interesting. But you could tell he also liked guys like Martin Mull, because we're about to talk about how a lot of what Martin Mull did on Fernwood Tonight was kind of mocking the Tonight Show in a way. And Carson loved that. But another reason I included that clip was that I didn't realize Martin Mull guest hosted the Tonight Show like a dozen times.
I had no idea. I also like that comment could have gone as well as it did or ended his career on that show.
Well, luckily Carson was at the end. I think this was Carson's last year.
Yeah.
So Martin could throw out whatever the hell he wanted. But but yeah, it's very funny. And I think podcasting has helped do away with some of this, but it's funny back in, like, if you look back in the day where a lot of the guys in the roles they were hated what they represented. I think Howard's a good example of that too, Howard Stern. Like, I think ultimately what we're seeing now, and we talked about it in the episode we did about him, like, I think he hated the audience he had and what he represented and resented it in a lot of ways. And I think you see some of that with Carson. Now, where Martin Mull is great is he got to experiment with that on Fernwood Tonight, which I think is what we're getting into next, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he's talking about it with Pollock.
So he is on he was on Mary Hartman as the character Garth Gimble, who was like, Mary Hartman was a very like cutting edge show in the way that they would tackle serious topics. And there was no, like, All in the Family, also another Norman Lear show, would tackle very serious topics, but it was multicam and had the laugh track and everything. Like on Patreon years ago, one of the first Patreon things we did is talk about the episode where Edith gets sexually assaulted.
I think that was the first thing we did.
And the studio audience is laughing throughout it, It's crazy.
Yeah.
So you have that weird element of like them sticking to comedy. Mary Hartman was interesting because it was kind of an early comedy that was single cam with no studio audience. So Martin Mull played a wife abuser on that show. And it was like I watched clips, and it is like there's some humor interjected, but it is a very serious role that he played. And so he went to Norman Lear and said, hey, like that character died off on Mary Hartman. And he said, is there any chance like this character could come back in any way? And so they brought it back with his twin brother, Barth Gimble, which is where they start talking about Fernwood Tonight here.
Well, acting with Fred Willard, it's like following someone who refuses to use their turn signals. You have no idea where he's going ever.
Right.
And that was fabulous. Was it heavily scripted? Yes. When we started the show, when Norman Lear decided we're going to do this show, Norman knew, as he knows most things, the talk shows are done 2 a day. You know, Merv used to take 2 a day. Johnny did 1, but a lot of people did 2 a day. So he figured, hey, this is only half an hour. It's not even a 90-minute. We can do 2 a day. Only it'll be scripted. That means these people who were writing half-hour scripts, and bear in mind, most half-hour television scripts take a week for one.
At least.
At least. They would have to write 10 a week.
10 half hours?
Yeah. And the writers were definitely put to the millstone with that. They just could not begin to do it. And so there was one show we were not dramatically, but 2 minutes short.
Uh-huh.
And Norman Lear said, can you guys improvise something? And Fred and I had just met on the set.
Is that
Yeah. This was after about the first 2 weeks. And he said, can you improvise something? And so we said, sure. And we just said, why don't I say that? You say that. We'll go, okay. And we ended up about 18 or 20 minutes over. And and they liked it enough that they cut back some of the other stuff. So from then on, it was more bullet points.
Kind of like Curb, I guess, where they knew they could tell them, like, here's the outline, just you two go with it. And that's truly amazing that these two met. Like, if you watch that show, you think it's a Martin Mull, Fred Willard project where they had to go to the network and beg, like, can we get on? Can you make sure you cast us in this together? When in reality, what happened is, you know, they got cast and were like, hey, here's your partner. And it's just, you have this great comedy team for many years, essentially, you know?
Yeah.
So if you don't know what Fernwood Tonight is, I'll explain. And it's interesting because it was a spinoff of this gritty Mary Hartman show. Mary Hartman took place in Fernwood, Ohio, if I'm not mistaken. And like I said, Garth Gimble was a wife abuser. And his twin brother, Barth Gimble, hosts this show, Fernwood Tonight. He's kind of the Johnny Carson of Fernwood. But it's just some, like, local access show, basically. And I say it's very early. If you watch Martin Mull's and Fred Willard's character, Barth Gimble and Jerry Hubbard, I believe, is Fred Willard. It's like David Brent and Michael Scott hosting a show together. Essentially is what it is. Because Martin Mull's character, they're similar characters, but Martin Mull's character is a little more of a pompous asshole, and Fred Willard's character is a little more of a dimwit. Like the difference between the English office and the American office, Brent and Michael Scott. So I think, like, if you talk about influences, I think that's a massive influence, is The Office, where, talk about ahead of its time, this is, 25 years before shows like that started getting accepted in the mainstream. So Fernwood Tonight was a syndicated late-night show. It was up against Carson, I think at the time, either the local news or Carson, because it was on at 11 o'clock, syndicated, which either one of those in 1978 is a tough act to compete against. So basically what they it was a parody where, well, I don't want to get too ahead of myself. What's our next clip? Because Martin Mull might explain it better than I can.
He's describing Barth Gimble.
Yeah, so this is him talking about his character on the show.
Yeah. Was he modeled after anybody, or was he a conglomeration, or what?
Bob Costas.
More of a conglomeration as far as the actual talk shows of hosts of the time, i.e. Carson,
Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, Dinah. This takes it back a bit, but it also, at that time, or just prior to that, I was touring a lot, doing music and so forth and so on. And you go back to the hotel in East Overshoe, someplace, and you turn on local cable access channel, 56, and there would be somebody there with pretensions that would just be enormous. And his guests would be the water commissioner and maybe his brother-in-law. But he would think he was doing the Johnny Carson's Tonight Show, and he would have all the pomposity of a big style entertainer. Right. Those people that worked at the piano lounge at Holiday Inns with the fishbowl with their own $5 to start the ball rolling, those kind of people were the models.
And that, like, is he not describing The Office, where it's like the guy just thinks he's a star, and it's a guy that everyone knows, mocked so brilliantly. And they do such a good job at it. And I forget which interview it was, but someone asked him, like, how he and Fred Willard were able to pull off those characters. And he goes, luckily it was pretty easy because I'm a bit of a pompous ass and he's a bit of an idiot. So, but to me, what that says is, because I don't think either guy, I think what that says is Martin Mull has an ounce of pomposity in him. Like he knows that exists there. And Fred Willard, like, knows he can be dumb or ask dumb questions or whatever. What they're able to do, and I think that's a beautiful sign of self-awareness, is they're able to exploit those things that might not be the most outward point of their character, but they know it exists in there. Much like Larry David says about the Larry David character on Curb, where it's like, that's the guy I would like to be in a perfect world. That's not how Larry behaves all the time, but like he's able to know what's funny about that, what's interesting about it, and why he can't do it in public all the time, and is able to mock it, the people that do act like that. So to me, like, Curb's probably another good example of a show that was influenced by Fernwood Tonight in some form or fashion. But also very interesting for Norman Lear to kind of go completely out of his comfort zone, where this isn't a sitcom at all. It's a talk show parody, which credit to him for doing that, because I guess Norman Lear went out of pocket to fund Fernwood Tonight because it was it did well in its time slot, but nothing was making money against Carson at that time. So it was still Norman Lear, like, went into his own pocket to fund a lot of it, I guess.
Was that the first like parody show?
I don't know the answer to that. Probably not. I would say probably not, but I don't know the answer to that. Like, if you know what, guys, if you do know, leave it in the comments.
Because it was the 70s, right? Yeah.
What was the first show parodying a show that was already on television? That's an interesting question. I don't think it was the first, but it was definitely one of the very early ones, if not. So yeah, talk about ahead of their time.
Definitely the one that probably got the ball rolling for everybody else to like cite when they're like pitching stuff like this show.
It's and it's very funny, and Martin did a good job of describing it there. But it is like the one we played, I think, when Fred Willard. No, we weren't doing the show when Fred Willard died. I can't remember why we did a Fernwood Tonight episode on Patreon very early on, and one of the clips we played, it was just called "Talk to a Jew." Where they found a Jew who was driving through the city, and most people in Fernwood hadn't really ever talked to a Jew, so they decided to have this Jewish man on to ask him what it was like to be Jewish.
It's looking like there was a mockumentary before this, but not far before.
Yeah, and again, like speaking of mockumentaries, Martin also was the star of the one thing, I guess, other than Fernwood Tonight, that he really like starred in, was at the forefront of, was The History of White People in America, which I believe was on Cinemax when it aired. Where it's one of those where maybe if it was on HBO or Showtime, it would have done a little better, but you kind of had to go out of your way to find it. But that was also like mockumentary style, and Fred Willard was a big part of that show as well, and that was very funny also. So a bunch of those clips are on YouTube if you want to check that out.
They're so perfectly dry. Like, it's just so funny.
That's exactly what it is. And I think the same way about Eugene Levy. It's why I love the show Schitt's Creek, because Eugene Levy and Chris Elliott are two other guys that I think of when I think of that type of humor, where it's it's dry perfectly. Like if you watch the history of white people in America, the first time you watch, you might not even spot most of the jokes,
Right?
because it's so dry.
Next we have them talking about America Tonight.
Yeah, so Fernwood Tonight, basically they needed to ramp things up because it wasn't getting the viewership that they wanted, so they created America Tonight. Barth Gimble and Jerry Hubbard were run out of Fernwood to reach a broader audience.
Myself and Mr. Willard, of course, the redoubtable Fred Willard, who is one of the geniuses of our time. But yeah, that was a problem. And what happened was when we reincarnated, we had done Fernwood Tonight, and we came back as America Tonight. And for that, for the express reason that we had so many people of the high recognizability ilk that we had to figure out a way to get them in, because there would be no way they could be just coincidentally in Fernwood, Ohio.
Right.
So we relocated in El Tacoma, California.
Well, that helps.
Unquote, quote unquote, damn near the airport. So we were claiming that these were people on their way somewhere, so which enabled us to get the Carol Burnett's and the Melissa Manchesters and Robin Williams and Charlton Hestons and people like that to come in.
Which is kind of a shame that they had to make that pivot, because I feel like Fernwood Tonight is just inherently funnier to be in this small town in Ohio rather than appealing to America. But
see,
again,
you still have those people passing through or something.
you could. I think this was more, I don't know, maybe the title is more grabbing. I don't know. But either way, this wasn't, America Tonight wasn't a massive success either. It's really more in hindsight that you go and watch Fernwood Tonight and realize it's brilliance. But
right,
yeah, that wasn't like a smash hit. I think it just speaks to Martin Mull's career, where it's something like wow, this was fucking genius. but it didn't reach as many eyeballs as a lot of other things that weren't as funny.
But here he is talking about just showbiz in general.
Yeah, so this is what I was talking about, the Letterman type of contempt that he had, where he has a lot of good quotes. Like I think he's attributed with saying something to the effect of like Hollywood is just high school with money. I think there's some quote like that is attributed to him. And I also heard him say politics is just Hollywood for ugly people, basically. Like he did have like a hatred of what he was doing, which is kind of funny.
You're involved in show business, but obviously you have a little bit of disdain for it too. How much does that inform the executive, the TV executive that you play on the Jackie Thomas show?
Well, first of all, I'm interested in where you think I have disdain for show business. Is it that apparent, or
don't we all?
Well, yeah.
Doesn't any thinking person, to some extent?
It is not rocket science by any means, and someone once said, I think it was Robert Mitchum, I could be very wrong, saying how difficult can it be to be, like, for instance, a movie actor when you realize one of the biggest money makers ever was a dog, Lassie films and Rin Tin Tin. But there's a bit of disdain for the duplicity and the chicanery that attends some of the decision making, and that goes into the playing of Doug Talbot on the Jackie Thomas show.
I mean,
so what you hear there, I think, is so smart, where now, and this goes into the idiocracy thing that our society is in right now in general, but like now you hear a lot of guys, because I focus mostly on podcasts. It's what I spend most of my day doing, is sifting through time-stamping podcasts for the Blind Mike Project. But what I notice is the biggest culprit, I think, of this, or the two biggest culprits maybe, are Dan Soder and Stavros Halkias, who I think are very funny guys. I like their comedy a great deal. But what annoys me is I hear them on podcasts bitching about having to podcast a lot. And they're just like, oh, I hate doing this so much. The second I can stop podcasting, I will. And it's like, well, you're doing that on your podcast. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I think the genius of a guy like Martin Mull, and Letterman is this way, Steve Martin was this way, they saw things they didn't like and had disdain for, and were able to use it and turn it into comedy. Where I think podcasting could easily be used for that, where if you made it goofing on other podcasts, essentially like Fernwood Tonight, make a parody of a podcast or something. I think that could very easily be done, rather than just guys sitting in front of a microphone being like, I hate this so much. And it's like, well, we're your audience. We enjoy you doing it, so you're making us feel like real assholes. But if you're able to channel that into art the way Martin Mull did, I think that's the right way to go about it.
Next, we have History of White People.
Oh, good. Yeah, I didn't know if we had a clip for that or not. So let's hear a little of the history of white people. I believe this is from the show, yes?
Yes.
Hello, I'm Martin Mull, and I'm not a crook. Why take my word for it? These people obviously won't. Who can blame them, really? It's a jungle out there. You can't pick up a paper these days without reading something in it. I know I do, and I bet you do too. Problem? It's a staple gun.
Staple what?
Gun.
Anyone that's just listening, they're going through like TSA checkpoint.
Yeah.
No guns.
No, it's a staple gun.
Pick it up on your way back.
Okay. Careful now, it's loaded. Despite what you might think, all that crime and violence isn't just festering in the inner city, the Mideast, or Miami, Florida. No, there's also the ugly, pus-filled boil of white crime that from time to time needs a good journalistic lancing. That's why we're taking our cameras off to the heartland, to Hawkins Falls, Ohio. So, come fly with me. Let's fly.
Again, when you talk about like the subtleties, essentially what he said there is like, despite what you might think, white people also commit crimes, which is just like they're so subtle and so dry with a lot of that stuff, but they're also commenting on like, as we always say, like they're the schmucks. Like Fred Willard in particular is a great example of that. Like he could play a character that's bigoted or racist or whatever, but he's the idiot. He's the butt of the joke of that. And
Right.
That's what Martin Mull did in this history of white people. It was essentially a joke about white people every week.
I don't know why him just going, and I am not a crook, like got me. It's such a nothing comment.
But yeah, again, mockumentary style, the way a lot of Christopher Guest stuff was. And these guys were just in an era where, like, if they were coming up, they were 20 years younger in mid 2000, like 2005 to 2010. They would have had massive shows. Like, these would have been huge hits. It was just, like I said, they were ahead of their time, and they were in places, like I said, Fernwood Tonight was syndicated up against The Tonight Show. The History of White People was on Cinemax. So it was just harder for people to find, where now people are much more used to having a bunch of different options and audiences being splintered in the ways that they are.
You always can say, like, certain people were ahead of their time. Like, that show and them specifically were way ahead of their time.
Light years.
Yeah.
Well, not only ahead of their time, but they spawned a lot of what became popular in that genre is directly because of these guys.
Like, they aged, like I said, you just said, like, they aged themselves out by the time it was picked up on.
It was just, Martin Mull was just too old to play Michael Scott.
Right. Exactly. Next we have him talking about being a gay guy.
Well, on Roseanne, yes. Yes, on the show Roseanne. Craig delivers it with smooth articulation as always. Talking about being a gay guy. So Martin Mull played Roseanne's boss on the show Roseanne. So this is him talking about that acting process.
Thank you.
Now, the character you play is
he's fatuous.
Hold on a second. Carson sounds like Craig there. He's like, what do we call these people?
if you listen to him too, he's about to be like, your character's a homo.
Yeah, he's what is he? Why don't you tell me what he is, Martin?
Thank you.
Now, the character you play is
he's fatuous. He's bilious. He's duplicitous. And keeping with the Greek theme, he has different sexual preference than myself.
Is that a challenge for an actor?
Certainly. It's
without being a caricature, because nobody wants to do that.
Well, I don't know why no one wants to do it.
A caricature, you
don't want to do a caricature. The step one is to treat everyone, if you're playing anyone, I guess, as a human being first. I've played a lawyer, for instance, and I've never been to law school. I know there are a lot of lawyers that do that on a daily basis.
Yes, I've had some of them.
Unique province of actors, but in this case, the gentleman is gay, and it's just going to play it as a. It wouldn't make any more of the fact that someone else was heterosexual.
Right.
I can say that on the air, can I?
Yes.
So we're not going to make any more of it than that.
And so smart to do, because again, don't forget, this is at a time where you were almost expected to play. Like, if you had a gay character on TV, they were supposed to be, flying out of their shoes, basically. Like, they were
imagine him playing the gay guy now. I'd be like, no, you need to ramp it up way more.
Well, there's also an interview where Fred Willard talks about it, and he says, like, our goal was to not be a caricature. And he goes, I didn't necessarily stick to that because I was just having so much fun with it. Like, Fred Willard's character on Roseanne, Fred Willard played Martin Mull's character's husband. And Fred Willard was a little more flamboyant. And he said it was just because he was enjoying it so much, which is very funny. But yeah, they were I always forget if Friends beat them or if they beat Friends. But Roseanne and Friends were the first two gay weddings on television within 6 months of each other. I forget which was first. I think it was Roseanne, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, Roseanne's boss was gay. It's amazing how progressive that the show Roseanne was. When you hear how people characterize Roseanne and then what she's become with her podcast and all this stuff. But like, her show was like cutting edge and incredibly progressive.
Definitely. Next we have Fred Willard talking about Roseanne. And
yeah, I wanted to at least, Fred Willard, I thought summed it up pretty good, but I wanted to at least have one Fred Willard clip in here. And so this is him talking about having to kiss Martin Mull.
Supposed to kiss, and it was sort of uneasy because I've known Martin for a long time. So he had second thoughts on the show, so Roseanne was supposed to give him a big smooch to prove to him that he was gay. And so when it came that time we were supposed to kiss, the camera kind of panned by and we faked it. The day after the show,
most people thought you had kissed.
They thought we kissed. The day after it was shown, he was having his car fixed, and his mechanic said, "Boy, you actors, I don't think I could do what you do." And he said, "Why, having to kiss Fred Willard?" He says, "No, having to kiss Roseanne."
That's fun.
That's very funny.
It is a weird plot line when you think Roseanne kissed this man to prove he was gay, as if, like, if you're not turned on by Roseanne, well, then you must be. It's a strange premise, but
according to some people we know, she never looked better.
I have heard that. Yeah, never looked better than she does right now, I guess.
But next we are into our favorite segment of the show.
Oh, we're already there. This flew by.
Yeah.
So yeah, before we get there, I will he did a bunch of other stuff. Like Martin Mull was in everything.
Everything.
And that's my point. Is like
known for nothing, but in everything.
Exactly. You're not like, oh, Martin Mull's project blank. The great. And again, unless you know Fernwood Tonight or History of White People. But like,
I guess it would be Roseanne. It was the thing he's most credited.
Probably what he's most known for is Roseanne, or Arrested Development is the other one I would say.
True.
I think when he died, like the Variety headline was probably Roseanne and Arrested Development actor Martin Mull dies at 80. But Arrested Development's another great example where like he's amazing in those scenes and he's perfect for them. It's just, 3 episodes a year or whatever it was.
Right.
And he was in so many, he was in an episode of like every show, basically. He even had a show, very short-lived, I think it was on IFC, if I'm not mistaken. It was called I'm Sorry. It starred the therapist from Step Brothers. You know what I'm talking about? The woman?
Oh, really?
It starred her. It was a very funny show. And Martin Mull played her sleazebag father. And he was great. And this is again like with Mary Hartman. If you know Martin Mull from like Roseanne or Arrested Development, I don't think you would think of him as like a real dirtbag, like him playing a real dirtbag. But he did that very well too. Like he was a good actor. He was a musician. He was an artist. He was a comic. Like the man was tremendously multi-talented. So in a way, it's fitting that you don't necessarily know him for any one thing. It was just a conglomeration of all the great work he did over the years. And as I said before, like he was in stuff like Sabrina the Teenage Witch also. So like every generation has something where you're like, oh yeah, I know that guy.
Right, and he's in a ton of voice stuff.
Does a lot of voiceover work. He would be in commercials. So just such a wide ranging career. And yeah, I always loved Martin Mull. Like if he was in something, I would get excited. Because he's he's much like Fred Willard, one of those guys where you were just happy to see him in something.
Fred Willard is almost like in more stuff. Like I know we just talked about, or I wasn't on it, but you talked about Tim Heidecker recently.
Yep.
He was awesome character actor on Tim and Eric Awesome Show.
Fred Willard probably, I'm not sure who has like more IMDb credits. I'd have to look that up, but like the Fred Willard, very similar thing where it's like he's the dad in Modern Family. He's the one of the in-laws and Everybody Loves Raymond. He's just in these things that were on forever, and he was a small part of them, but probably the most talented guy on screen when he was in an episode, you know? All right, so let's get to Martin Mull on Norm. Like I said, Martin Mull, these are very light. No, you don't see Norm in these clips even really. It's more Martin Mull standing out, but we were able to shoehorn an episode of Norm Macdonald live into this. And this is him doing jokes at the end of the show.
All right, what about this joke?
Okay. I love it. A Chinese man spent 10 years developing a suitcase that doubles as a motorized scooter. There's no word on whether he had any particular hopes or dreams.
There was another one, they handed him a note card and he started to read it and then kind of laughed and goes, I have a career. And he just handed him the note back and he didn't read it.
Usually that's when Adam Egget will read them.
So we will end today with another joke he tells on Norm Macdonald Live earlier in the episode. This is just an old street joke. I think I've heard Gilbert tell this one as well. But I think Martin Mull's delivery is great. So that's what I wanted to end the show with today. So the premise of it starts with a man watches his wife have a stroke and they're rushing her to the hospital. And this is where Martin Mull picks up.
Immediately, they take her right through the swinging doors into the ER, and he's out there just, oh my God, for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. Finally, the doctor comes out and said, Johnson? I said, yeah. He said, Joyce is here? Yes. He said, well, she's had a stroke. And he said, yes, that's what I thought. He said, and I just want to tell you, it's a big one. He said, you're probably going to have to, she won't be able to speak, so you'll have to probably learn sign language, and she's also deaf, so that will help there too. And as part of the speaking is being able to literally move her mouth. So in order to feed her, you'll have to place food in her mouth, move her jaw up and down, and get her some exercise in the jaw that way she can actually eat. And while you're doing that, be a good time to roll over and start rubbing off because of the bed sores that are going to come in. And there's going to be, with that form of eating, there's always digestive problems, so you're going to be cleaning up a lot of. And the guy said, "No, really?" And he goes, "No, I'm just kidding you. She's dead."
And his delivery's so perfect because you can see Martin Mull playing that doctor in some show where he delivers that news. He's, "Nah, I'm just kidding you. She's dead." So, you know what? You guys let us know in the comments. What's your favorite Martin Mull role? Because I'm sure there's a bunch we haven't even touched on that had an impact on people. But those were some of my favorites. So, like I said, hopefully this sends you down a Martin Mull rabbit hole. Like Fernwood Tonight and the History of White People. Enough of that stuff is on YouTube that you should definitely go check that out, if nothing else. So, rest in peace, Martin Mull. Had a hell of a run. He died at 80, but then you also think, like, our president's 80, I guess. So it is weird to say that. But
he's mentally free, though.
Yeah, not that that's a great representative of 80-year-olds. But
don't get me going.
All right, we're almost down. I'm sorry. I should rile Craig up. If you want to support the program, the best place to do that is blindmike.net. We appreciate you guys going there. And all our links are there. If you want to become a member, YouTube or Patreon are the places you can do that for as little as $5 a month. Subscribe and you get early access and bonus content, so consider doing that. Or just support the show for free wherever you get podcasts. Also, Blind Mike Project and Who Are These Socials. I do Who Are These Socials every Thursday with Carl from Who Are These Podcasts. Every Thursday at 6 if you want to watch that live on YouTube. Blind Mike Project is, generally speaking, sometimes we change it up, but generally speaking, every Sunday at 10 a.m. If you want to check that out on YouTube as well. And like I said, all the links are at blindmike.net. So we appreciate you guys supporting that. Go check out Craig's True Crime podcast, Rubbed Out.
Yes, Rubbed Out, and very good show.
Yeah, check both of those out. Our boy Hackride, behind the scenes. Check out hackridethedemon.com. And Hackride also does, if you like Why You Laughing, Hackride's been doing a weekly breakdown of every single Eric the Midget call into the Howard Stern show ever. I think there's like 500 calls or something, and they're not even up to 100 yet. So they got a long way to go. So if you like the Howard Stern Why You Laughings in particular, go check out Hackride's channel, and Casey Day and DJ Electra break down all the Eric the Midget calls. All right. We will talk to you guys next time on Why Are You Laughing?
Zip it up and zip it out.